Hi, I'm Whitney Belker with Miami's Global Connection. Our show is designed to raise public awareness of the interdependent world in which we live. We focus on local leaders who are involved in diverse international issues and projects. The sponsor of our show is the Greater Miami chapter of the United Nations Association of the United States. The United Nations Association is a grassroots group devoted to informing and educating the public about many of the critical services provided by the United Nations. Today our guests are Ambassador Luis Lauredo, the Executive Director of the FTAA, Trade Ministerial, and America's Business Forum recently held in Miami in November 2003, and Ambassador Maisto, the current Ambassador of the Organization of American States. Ambassador Lauredo previously served as the U.S. Ambassador to the Organization of American States, as well as the U.S. Coordinator for the Third Summit of the Americas, the gathering of 34 elected heads of states in the hemisphere, held in Quebec City in April 2001. He also served as the Executive Director of the First Summit of the Americas, held in Miami in December 1994. When he's not rounding up the 34 presidents of the Americas nations, Ambassador Lauredo directs the International Division of Hunton and Williams Law Firm in Miami and Washington, D.C. Today we're going to discuss the progress of the FTAA negotiations, and we are honored that Ambassador Lauredo is here with us firsthand to give us some insights. Welcome, Ambassador Lauredo.
Well, it's a pleasure, Whitney, to be here with you and to share the program with my good friend, Ambassador Maisto, who was also instrumental in the summit in Quebec City, as well as his current title as Ambassador to the OAS.
Great. Well, let's first start by explaining what is the Free Trade Area of the Americas.
In the simplest terms, is a vision created by the 34 democratically elected leaders in 1994 to create the largest common market ever in the history of mankind. It would be to unite this hemisphere of about 800 million people into a market that would provide for economic growth through open trade and commitment to free market economies, create prosperity, and through that to really reach the overall goal of eradicating poverty in this hemisphere, which is so deep in some countries. So it's not just about trade, it's trade with a vision. It's a commitment to a vision of prosperity for the people of the Americas.
Right, and I understand that this has been going on for quite some time. I did some research and found that these plans date back to Woodrow Wilson's Pan American Pact, Roosevelt's Good Neighbor Policy, JFK's Alliance for Progress, Reagan's Caribbean Basin Initiative, and Bush's Enterprise for the Americas, as well as Clinton's push for the FTAA, and now President Bush's push for the FTAA.
Well, and it's actually, some historians will take you back to 1821 with President Harrison kicked off an idea of integrating the hemisphere. What is really very relevant, I think, and for you to know and the audience, is that we're now living in a very nice, I guess about 12 years, what I always coin sustained engagement. President Bush the first really kicked off this modern version of it when he negotiated the famous NAFTA, Free Trade Americas, the North American Free Trade Agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And in fact, it was that, in celebration of that triumph, that we held the Summit of the Americas in Miami. And it was President Clinton who inherited the treaty when he took over the presidency and paid a very high political price to get it ratified by the Senate. We all remember the famous debates with Ross Perot and all that stuff. Well, that meeting in Miami kicked off this vision that I described earlier, and here we are back in 1994. People thought that the presidents had a Don Quixote complex by having this ideal of such magnitude, and within a framework of 10 years, and we're within a year away, and we've made a significant progress, and I think that we will realize that dream in January 1st, 2005. So it's gone from Republican, Democrat, back to Republican, and I think that's very healthy kind of bipartisan commitment to overall goals and objectives, and that's very healthy for the hemisphere and for our country.
Well, I understand that we recently held the FTA ministerial meetings here in Miami, and that you played an intricate role in organizing these efforts. So who are some of the other players involved in this whole movement? Well,
the process right now is being co-chaired by Brazil and the United States, and they are to the end until January 2005. And they're, I think, the two protagonists. They're also the two largest countries in the hemisphere. But more importantly, I think I remind people, the two largest democracies in the hemisphere, because underlying all of this talk And when I tell people who get frustrated about the supposedly conflict between Brazil, the United States, and other countries, I find that to be a cause of celebration, because we do in fact live in vibrant democracies, which we respond to domestic pressures. The United States President responds to domestic pressure, so does the President of Brazil, the President of Costa Rica, the President of Bolivia. You know, if it were 34 dictators, we could have had this treaty in 2 months. So it's something that we sometimes forget in the heat of the arguments.
Now, why do you say that?
Because I think people need to be reminded of basic. It is an absolutely incredible statement to make that this hemisphere is now going on to about 12 years of sustained democratic rule on 34 out of the 35 countries in this hemisphere, with the tragic exception of Cuba, which has a dictatorship of about 40-some years. We all are united by the principle of democracy. They're not all perfect, including ours. But we're all committed to the general principle that the human being, a citizen, is the commanding ruler. And therefore, it's complicated. Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst system of government devised by man, until you think of the alternative. And those of us who have lived on the alternative, I think we'll almost always choose democracy. So the seemingly chaos, conflict is healthy. It's not something to feel bad about. It's great. It's a cause for celebration.
You're correct. And I think it's interesting to note that I believe like 20 years ago, there were only three countries that had locally elected government officials in the region, and now I believe there are only 3 countries that don't have diverse locally elected officials. So democracy's come a long way, and that's perhaps been a good catalyst to moving these negotiations forward. But in terms of some of the players that were involved in the ministerial meetings, I believe that Enrique Iglesias was from the Inter-American Development Bank, which is like the World Bank, but specific to Latin America. I believe we have some pictures of some of the different personalities and players involved in the FTAA ministerial meetings. Perhaps you could bring up some of those photos for us to look at. I believe there's Enrique Iglesias, and then also... 2
of the key players, so the most dominant players, who probably are not in your pictures because they're working very hard behind, I think, is Ambassador Selleck, who is the United States Trade Representative, who is almost like our minister in charge, and Ambassador Cesar Amorim, who is his counterpart in Brazil, who serve as co-chairs.
Right. I think we have Alicia from ECLAC. Right. And then we have Ambassador Lauredo here on the screen at the podium. I think we also have a wide shot just to give a visual of what the negotiations look like for the people who are able to participate. There's also former President Gaviria, who's currently the Secretary General of the OAS, if I'm not mistaken. And then again, I think we have Enrique Iglesias on the next photos coming up.
Those 3 organizations are they're called the Tri-Party Commission, which are 3 organizations to support the process.
And which organizations are those again?
The Inter-American Development Bank, the Organization of American States, and the Economic Commission for Latin America of the United Nations.
Okay.
But the ministers that represent each of the democracies are 34 representatives of 34 democratically elected leaders who will lead the negotiations, and Ambassador Selleck and Ambassador Amorim are the 2 leaders of that. But they're all, of course, equal. We have the system under which you're working now on this common agenda of supporting democracy and promoting economic growth, which is the pillars of the Summit of the Americas, have very strong sovereignty, respect for small countries as small as 30,000, 40,000 people, as St. Kitts and Nevis, as large economies. Like
right, those small countries are a great concern for many involved in these negotiations, and there's been a tremendous amount of scrutiny, as we're aware of, on the FTAA in general. And what perhaps people in Miami are most familiar with are the protesters from, say, the labor groups, the environmental groups, the manufacturing, who are concerned that jobs might move overseas. If you had the opportunity to address these different groups on these issues, what would your message be?
Well, the first thing I would tell them is that globalization is not a cause of FTAA. FTAA is an effort to give order and to give a judicial and orderly framework to what is happening in our lives, which is globalization.